This boy's name is George. Out of 4 siblings, only George is the biggest. Because he lives in poverty, his mother had to divide the food into 5 so that everyone could eat. Even though their family life is poor, his mother always teaches her children not to complain and to always be grateful. Before eating, when the others are focused on praying, George's expression looks annoyed. For him, in this poor life of deprivation, God is just nonsense. At school, George is a smart kid, but because he is poor, he is often belittled by his friends and even his own teacher. He is also often teased by the call "Poor George." That day, George, who was sick of being teased all the time, finally beat up his friend and left school. 7 years later, it is seen that George is now 18 years old. Because he dropped out of school and did not have a diploma, George was forced to earn money by stealing. That night, while in action, George was shocked that his victim was a police officer. Luckily, he managed to escape. On the way home, he accidentally saw a TV advertisement. There was a special government program dormitory that accommodates dropouts. In the dormitory, everyone will be trained in work skills, get free food, and get a monthly salary. Seeing the opportunity, George immediately told his mother. His mother allowed it. His mother only advised, if later, when living independently, there are problems, George should never give up and continue to focus on achieving his dreams. Whatever happens, the main thing is that you are not allowed to go home until you become a successful person. His mother's words just now made George even more enthusiastic. The next morning, after registering, George started to enter the dormitory. In the room, when he opened his bag, George was very happy that his mother had bought him new shoes and a piece of motivational message paper. George then started to study with enthusiasm. George was very enthusiastic about reading the motivational message from his mother. He felt very lucky to have a mother who always supported him. During recess, George was surprised why his new shoes were missing. While having lunch with his friend named Desmond, George accidentally saw the shoes his mother gave him being worn by the thief. George immediately ran after the thief who was wearing the shoes his mother gave him. He ran fast, not wanting to lose track of the thief. George kept running, passing through the dormitory yard, until he finally managed to catch up with the thief. Luckily, there was an officer named Doc Broadus who came to break it up, because of the commotion that damaged the dormitory door. Doc was forced to send George home. In the car, when he was about to be taken to the bus stop, George kept begging not to be sent home. He apologized while saying that this dormitory was the only hope he had. Hearing that, Doc felt sorry. Doc then offered, what if George became a boxer? With a body and strength as big as before, Doc was sure that one day George would be able to become a successful boxer. Although he did not understand boxing at all, but in order not to be sent home, George answered, yes. At the training ground, after wearing boxing equipment, Doc explained some of the rules in the ring. When everything was ready, George began his first training. He faced a more experienced opponent, but George was not afraid. With enthusiasm and determination, he continued to try to hit him, but was unsuccessful. Doc gave instructions and directions. But because his opponent was more experienced, George was hit and fell. George lost badly. Annoyed at being laughed at, George left. In the locker room, seeing George's anger, Doc tried to calm him down. He advised George, thinking too much about other people's opinions, that you can't focus on studying. Even though George's strength is great, if you don't master the technique, then you can't win. After the training hours were over, Doc began to train George in basic boxing techniques. During training, Doc explained that boxing is not just about punching, but also having to control your mind. If you can control your mind, then you can control the course of the match. Week after week, George continued to train. One month later, during the rematch, George's movements looked much better than before. With a hard punch, he managed to win easily. After the match, George met Doc and asked to join the World Heavyweight Championship. He then showed him a boxing magazine while saying that he wanted to be successful and rich like the famous boxer named Joe Frazier. Seeing the young man's enthusiasm, Doc explained that in order to be able to compete in the World Championship, George had to win several professional matches first. Since he was still a beginner, Doc suggested that George train as hard as possible for a year to prepare. After a year of training in 1968, George finally participated in an amateur class selection match in Mexico. During the match, George was continuously cornered by his opponent. Luckily, he was able to turn things around. George won and successfully passed the selection. Now he could box at the next level, namely the professional level. After returning from Mexico, George happily met his mother. Seeing her son's success, his mother was very proud. A few days later, George was told by Doc to go to the city of Oakland. At the airport, George met a beautiful woman named Paula. After getting to know each other and exchanging phone numbers, the two of them parted ways. Arriving at a training ground in the city of Oakland, Doc introduced George to a former professional boxer who would be his new trainer. Before training, the former boxer reminded him, "From now on, George must prepare himself mentally because fighting at the professional level is not as easy as imagined." A year passed. In 1969, George made his debut as a professional boxer. In addition to boxing, his relationship with Paula also grew closer. In the end, they both decided to get married. After getting married year after year, George continued to win his professional matches without ever losing. So he became one of the best boxers in the world with a very impressive reputation. After 4 years of boxing at the professional level, now George is finally worthy of competing in the World Heavyweight Championship. Although a newcomer, George immediately dared to challenge his idol boxer Joe Frazier.
There's the bell, they're underway. There is. Feel surprised. He's just hitting him again. Frazier, take. He's down again. So early. He's down. Heavyweight champion.
After fighting hard, George finally won, meaning he had won Joe Frazier's champion title. To celebrate the victory, that night George held a party. At the party, George's old friend from the dormitory, Desmond, also attended to congratulate him. Seeing his friend's success, Desmond was very proud. Because he was now rich, George asked Desmond to be his personal assistant and accountant to take care of his finances. Hearing the offer, Desmond agreed. In the morning, when he had just finished taking a shower, George saw on TV a heavyweight boxer named Muhammad Ali, commenting on George's boxing technique while challenging him to a duel. Hearing Ali's provocation, George felt challenged. In the afternoon at home, George invited his mother and sister to celebrate his little daughter's birthday. During the event, they all laughed together, enjoying the food. They were happy. Before, just to eat one bread had to be shared by 5 people, but now food was abundant. However, in the midst of happiness, Paula looked sad. Since being successful and rolling in money, she felt that her husband had changed lately. George seemed to no longer love Paula. After the event, because they were tired of George's attitude, the husband and wife had a big fight until finally Paula asked for a divorce. A year later, in 1974, George accepted Muhammad Ali's challenge. That night, when everyone was ready, the big match between George and Muhammad Ali began.
I don't see any place to hide in that. Looking for a...
Back to the ropes, George. Come and get me. They own him.
Round after round, George always tried to attack Ali, but because he kept attacking, his stamina ran out. In the 8th round, seeing George's punches getting weaker, Ali attacked back.
Foreman looks tired. Big right hand.
My turn.
For the first time after 40 consecutive wins, George finally lost, meaning that his championship title had now been won. After the match, George went home very disappointed. 6 months passed. One night, in order to raise his reputation again, George challenged 5 boxers to a duel at once. Ali was also there to watch. However, even though George defeated his opponents, the audience cheered and called out Ali's name. Emotionally, George challenges Ali to a rematch, but Ali refuses. In the locker room, seeing his student frustrated, Doc tries to accompany him. Shortly after, George gets a letter informing him that his sister is giving birth, but her condition is critical. George rushes to the hospital. At the hospital, after hearing his mother's story about his little brother's condition, George was shocked. The only hope was a miracle from God. In the midst of his sadness, George knelt down for the first time in his life. George prayed, crying. He begged God, "Take my life, not my little brother." Throughout the night, George continued to pray nonstop until the morning. When he woke up, his mother told him that his little brother and baby had survived. Hearing that sentence, George couldn't believe it. It turned out that God really existed. God really answered his prayers. 3 years later, George was seen competing with a heavyweight boxer named Jimmy Young. However, due to the trauma of losing to Ali in the past, George's abilities seemed to decline, which ultimately resulted in George losing. In the locker room, when he was frustrated, suddenly his body felt strange. In the midst of confusion, George seemed to hear a mysterious voice calling his name. Because he couldn't stand the spiritual incident he was experiencing, George fainted. When he came to, his body felt strange again. It felt like he had just been reborn. George was there continuing to call out the name of God, then doused his body with water. Since that incident, George became diligent in worship. Until one day, after making up his mind, George suddenly told Doc that he wanted to retire from boxing. He wanted to become a preacher and devote himself to the path of God. Hearing the surprising decision, Doc left disappointedly. A few days later, George was seen preaching on the side of the road. After preaching, he met and got to know a beautiful woman named Mary. The two of them then chatted to get to know each other. 7 years passed. In 1985, now George had become a pastor in his small church. He and Mary were also married and had 2 children. One morning at home, while watching TV, there was news about 2 children caught by the police for stealing. Seeing the news, George remembered his childhood memories. He then planned to open a sports center to educate poor street children. The following week, after surveying the location of the building with Desmond, George immediately bought it and began designing a program to help the children. George was very excited to start this project and have a positive impact on the community. With a clear vision and mission, George was sure that this sports center could be a safe and comfortable place for children to learn and develop. However, a few months later, suddenly the electricity went out. When checked, George was shocked that he had never paid for the electricity. Feeling that something was wrong, he went to the bank to check the financial report. The bank officer there told him that all his savings were gone, and now George had debts at the bank. Hearing that, George was shocked. He didn't expect the money he had worked so hard for to disappear. That night, George looked for Desmond at the bar. Emotionally, he chased Desmond and asked where his money was. Desmond apologized while explaining that all the money was gone because of a fraudulent investment. Hearing that explanation, George fell silent. The next day, George tried to become an advertising model to earn money. He also sold souvenirs to his fans, but when it was calculated, the money he had collected was still not enough to pay off his debts at the bank. The next day, because he could not pay his debts, the bank was forced to seize George's sports building. From a distance, when he saw street children unable to train anymore, George's heart ached. He then met Doc. After telling him about his condition, George begged Doc to train him again like before. Seeing the seriousness of his former student, Doc decided to agree, but on the condition that George had to lose weight. Hearing Doc's answer, George was very happy. He started training to lose weight. He started by doing light exercise and adjusting his diet to be healthier. George also asked Mary to monitor his diet and provide moral support. Every day, George trained hard and tried to achieve the target set by Doc. He also monitored his progress and was very satisfied with the results. A few months later, George started sparring. However, due to age, George's stamina was no longer the same. He was easily defeated. In 1987, after 2 years of training as hard as possible, George tried to challenge a professional boxer.
Fight when you want to go home! Fight! You want to fight? Finish him!
That's enough, man.
George won. News of George's victory and comeback also went viral. He continued to go through match after match until George finally managed to re-enter the World Heavyweight Championship again. That day, George challenged a boxer who held the world title named Michael Moorer.
Uppercut by Moore. Now he just looks so tired.
During the match, George continued to be cornered by his opponent. In the 9th round, during the break, because he was worried Doc would try to stop the match, but George refused. Calmly, George signaled that he would definitely win. After the bell rang, the match continued. George won. All the audience were shocked, as if they couldn't believe that George, the old boxer, was able to win the match. With all the excitement, George was not overly happy. He chose to kneel and thank God. He also hugged and thanked Doc, the trainer who never tired of training him. Thanks to this victory, George was awarded as the oldest boxer in history to become a world champion. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Amri Film channel so you don't miss the next movie recaps.